Yo, what's going on? What's going on, guys? And welcome back. We are doing Intro to C2 or Command and Control. If you guys are familiar, thank you guys for joining and thank you for watching. This series is a lot of fun, actually. I'm having a lot of fun with the Red Team Learning Path. If you guys are enjoying it, make sure you hit the sub button. It helps out a ton. We're almost at 2K. I'm super excited. If you guys haven't checked out the Patreon, check it out. Join the YouTube. It gets very similar content to the Patreon, but the Patreon gets a little bit more content and some certification paths and things like that. So without further ado, let's hop into it. So first things first, intro to C2. So as you guys know in my tutorials or my walkthroughs, whatever you want to call them, I don't really read this word for word. What is C2? It's command and control, meaning you have a server that commands and controls everything. Now, a lot of people that I notice, and we'll go ahead and hop to 2, a lot of people that I notice associate this with botnets and things like that, and that is correct. It does utilize botnets, or botnets utilize C2, but so do a lot of attacks. It's not just botnets, so keep that in mind. I guess technically a botnet just means you're controlling bots, but it is much more than that, and so you don't necessarily need to have a botnet to have a C2 server. You could just be doing a long-term attack, right? And you could have just one host that you're taking over. So let's go ahead and look into it. So here we go. What is the command and control framework? So you can see they're giving you a little bit of information, blah, blah. So the agents are what they're calling the victims in this case, and the agents call back to the command and control server. So this is what it looks like very, very simplistically. You have a C2 server, and don't worry about this page this over here, guys. This is what we're going to be working on here in a second. So you can see here that all the victims are calling back to the C2 server, and the operator's telling them what to do. Okay, perfect. So here's basically they're showing you the same thing, but they're showing it a little differently. You have victim 1, victim 2, victim 3 all talking to a C2 server, and you have the attacker connecting into the C2 server, which is a little different here because this operator is actually running on the C2 server, and here he's actually connecting to the C2 server. So for this one, we're going to be connecting to the C2 server, but the C2 server is hosted on our machine. So with that, you're going to need to know a few terminologies. Agents and payloads. So an agent is a program generated by C2 that calls back to the listener. So the agents are what they're calling the actual program that calls back to the C2 server. Listeners, this you should be familiar with any hacking. A listener is listening. It's sitting there open, waiting for a connection. And then beacons is the process of the C2 agents calling back to the listener running on C2 server. So what that means is every now and then, depending on how you have it set up, you're going to get a beacon back, and it's going to say, hey, I'm still here, I'm still listening, don't worry about it, right? So here, this is some of the things that obfuscating agent callbacks. So when you have callbacks, this is what you want to avoid. You notice they have it set every 5 seconds. It's calling back to say, hey, I'm here, hey, I'm here, hey, I'm here, right? And it's listening for commands too every 5 seconds. Now, I'll tell you, there's a few things. Now, they call this jitter, and jitter is when you notice it's just off a little bit. There's no pattern to it. Well, there is a little bit of a pattern, but it's not nearly like this, right? It's a little harder to detect. So this is much better. You want jitter. Now, I'll tell you, the very good APTs, the reason they don't get caught for so long isn't because they put some jitter on and they call it a day. Their callbacks, they might get a callback. They might have a once every 48 hours it calls back, and then they might have jitter set to that could be every 24-hour difference. So instead of this like little 3 sec or 10-second difference here where, okay, it called back in 3 seconds, then 10 or 13, blah, blah, it might say, okay, it called back on the 1st, and then it didn't call back, or then it called back on the 2nd, and then it didn't call back again to the 4th, and then it called back on the 7th. Like, they're very sporadic, and they may even have it spread out far enough that it may only call back once a week if they're really planning a large-scale attack, right? And the reason for this is because you might say, well, that doesn't make any sense because it's going to call back and ask for a command, but you can't give it a command for an entire week. Well, that's the point. They would plan it, and what they would do is right before their attack window, they would set all that to, okay, no more waiting for a command every week. Now you are listening to everything I'm doing, and the connection stays consistent, right? So that is kind of how that works. So keep that in mind, that these callbacks, they're showing you here on a small scale because this is only a matter of 30 seconds here. But most people, if they're really trying not to get caught, will have this go running for a very long time. And the less time, the less pattern, the less realistic it is that you're going to get caught. Because a firewall and heuristic behavioral and analytics is going to detect this if they notice that, hey, this is connecting every 24 hours, even if it's only a 10-second difference. It's connecting at the same time every day. Okay, so here's how they work. So you have stageless and staged payloads. This isn't just with C2 server. This is with a lot of payloads. So stageless, you drop a exe file, whatever, and it connects back to the C2 server. Boom, it did everything for you. Now, staged payloads, what that is they actually drop something, or it's called a dropper. And when they run that, that will actually reach back out to whatever your server is and pull the rest of the malware down. Now, what's the benefit and why would you rather do this? Because with a dropper, the dropper is going to reach out on an HTTP connection most likely, or DNS, or whatever connection they set up, right? And when it does that, it's going to actually pull down the rest of the malware, and that's going to be encrypted, the rest of the malware, because it's using an HTTPS connection or whatever. So antivirus is not going to detect it coming through the firewall. Whereas this payload.exe, if let's say it's a known malware, it's just going to have a signature, and the firewall is going to stop it right there and say, no, we're not letting you in. Versus the dropper, where you can drop a seemingly non-malicious file that just reaches out and grabs the rest of it. The other thing is, if you have a malware that's large, and let's say it's 500 megs, whatever size you want, but the dropper's only 10 meg, you could get that through a lot easier without detection, right? All right, so the steps for establishing C2 beacon with staged payloads are as follows. So here you go. This is the staged payload. The victim downloads and executes the dropper. The dropper calls back. We covered that. I'm not going to go through it. So now we have payload formats. You have PowerShell scripts. You have HTA files, JScript. You guys know this. You don't have to have a Windows executable to execute on Windows. Everyone knows that. You can run PowerShell scripts, command line. You can run HTA files, JScript, Visual Basic, all kinds of stuff, right? So now you have modules. So you have exploitation modules, post-exploitation modules. This is after you've already exploited it. You already have that connection. Now what can I do to it, right? I already have control of it, whether it's a regular user or a root user or whatever, and now I want to get more information from it. So those are post-exploitation modules. Pivoting modules, that's pretty self-explanatory. It's when I have control of this machine and I want to take control of this machine, I pivot to that to try and either take control or gather information from that machine. All right, so now facing the world. This is pretty good information here. This is something a lot of people don't think about. If your C2 server is just facing the internet, right, you're basically saying you have terrible OPSEC, if you remember the last box, because you're basically saying, here's everything that we're doing, because everyone can see what you're doing because you're sending it all out to the world. So here's what we're doing. So as soon as someone detects us, they can report it to an ISAC, and then all of your indicators of compromise are blocked, right? Because they know your IP, they know all that. So here's a couple benefits, right, to doing it this way. The C2 server forwards it to Cloudflare, and then Cloudflare forwards it onto the compromised device. Now, there's a couple reasons to do this. Number one, if this gets blocked, if Cloudflare gets blocked, the IP address, right, gets blocked, your main C2 server IP address is not blocked, meaning you don't have to go through and change it or anything. You can just set up another Cloudflare instance or another whatever instance and try the attack again on a different machine or whatever. If you just use your C2 server and don't use a mediary or intermediary, then what will happen is, as soon as you get caught, as soon as you get busted one time, it will now be blocked. And not only will it be blocked, but it'll be flagged on the internet as malicious, which means every other company is probably going to block you as well. So therefore, your C2 server is now burnt and you are screwed. So you do not want to do it that way. You want to have an intermediary that is running the stuff for you to protect your C2 server. Because these C2 servers, yes, we're going to set one up very quickly, but they take a very long time to implement correctly and do the right way to not get busted and not get burnt, okay? So now you can see here's another way to do it. So these are C2 profiles. So what this works, how this works is the C2 server runs it out, right? Runs it to whatever compromised device. Now, when they do this, they change the headers. So the headers will have specific verbiage or something in it that you want. And when that happens, it will then go to the Cloudflare. Now, if Cloudflare gets now Cloudflare is just a tool that they're using to host here. Keep that in mind. But if Cloudflare gets a regular request with a regular header, it just gives them a different screen. It gives them a, welcome to so-and-so's website, right? But if it gets a request with that header that you changed on the compromised device, then when they send it in, it actually forwards it on to the C2 server. So hopefully that makes sense. So if this regular workstation reaches out to the same site, it will just, okay, whatever, give you something. So if someone goes to check it out, it gives them just a blank canvas, basically. But if Cloudflare gets a specific header in there, because it's gonna read it, and it's gonna say, oh, that goes forwarded on, right? So that's what we're looking at with the profiles here. So now, what is the component's name that lives on the victim machine that calls back to the C2 server? That's agent. If you remember, the agent is what calls back. Now, what's the beaconing option that introduces a random delay? That's jitter. If you remember, it changes a variation of when it's going to call back. What is the term for the first portion of a staged payload? That's a dropper. So it drops it in, and then from there it reaches out and gets the whole payload. Now, what is the name of the communication method that can potentially allow access to restricted network? And you can see it's SMB beacon, but they talked about it right up here. I just skipped over it. But right there, SMB beacon. And that will allow you to, it doesn't necessarily always allow, but it allows for restricted network segments. All right, so now, common C2 frameworks. This is, keep in mind when we say C2, it's always command and control, and that is not just a hacker's term. I've actually worked on C2 environments before for a lot of corporations and things like that. It's just a way to say we control a lot of machines, okay? Now, here is Armitage. This is what we're going to use today. You can see it's got a nice GUI. It's cute, blah, blah, blah. Great, right? Here's PowerShell Empire. I've used Empire quite a bit, and Empire is very nice as well, but you can see the GUI may not be as friendly. I like Empire better than Armitage. Armitage seems finicky and outdated a little bit to me. I understand that it's not. It's still a good C2 server. Covenant, I actually really like Covenant. These are free ones. Keep this in mind. I forgot to say that. These are the free ones. I really like Covenant. I've never really messed with Sliver much. And then here's the paid ones. Cobalt Strike's the king ding-a-ling here. So Cobalt Strike is what everyone is familiar with. It's not super expensive, but it's expensive if you're just doing this for fun. So keep that in mind. And then Rattle, excuse me. There you go. You can see it's a little bit more hacker friendly. I'll say that. So those are the other C2 frameworks that you can cover. Now here, they're telling us how to set up Armitage. Now this does take a little bit, so I'm going to walk you through it, but I'm not going to do it all here. So this is the attack box. It works fine on the attack box. So here, you're going to get the clone and change directories into Armitage. That's all they're doing here. Then here, bash package.sh. They're just running the package.sh as a bash script. It runs it. It sets it up. Perfect. Now you're changing into the change directory into the release Unix, and then you're listing it out to make sure that it has the correct files that you need, and it should. And then from there, you'll see that you'll have the IP address and the shared password file. And then, so Armitage, when you connect, this is what it's going to look like when you first set it up. Now, put your IP address here, your actual IP address. Don't put 127.0.0.1 because Armitage blocks that by default. So whatever user and password you put here, remember that because you need to log in with it later. So then you're going to run the PostgreSQL. This is just to set up the Metasploit framework. You need Postgres database going on. And then you can see it's telling you to get rid of the defaults and set up new ones. Okay, perfect. Now, here you're just setting up, you're changing directories, and you're running a script, and then you're putting in the IP and password. So this is whatever password you want to set up, okay? So when I say whatever password you want to set up, you'll see what I mean. So now, when we go here, and you can see here, I will run it. So you can see I ran this exact command, which is cd opt blah blah. We're already in that, so we should just be able to run .armitage, and you can watch, it will pull up. And you can see I did all the other commands up here, so it's running Armitage on this server up here. And keep in mind, it does tell you, pay attention to the username, because root is one of the usernames, but then some of the commands need to be ran as user, okay? In order to do this, you have to su switch user into Ubuntu, okay? So you can see here, I'm logged in as Ubuntu there, not root. You can see that up there. Oh, you can't see that up there, excuse me. So you can see right here, I'm logged in as Ubuntu to run the Metasploit commands, and then here I'm logged in as root to have the Armitage commands. So now here, we're logged in. You can see I have the IP, MSF, and then one thing I want to show you guys is, this is running really slow now, is you can see one thing they give you when you set this up, and you need to hold on to it. I've scrolled too far, but they give you a thumbprint. That thumbprint you want to keep at all times when you're running a C2 server, because watch what happens when I connect. You ready? So we go ahead and connect. And it should, you would notice this on the logs too. So what's your nickname? We'll say Stuffy. And this is just a nickname because it's going to keep in the logs who logged in. You don't obviously use your real name here if you were doing this in a bad way. Even on a pen test, I wouldn't put my real name. And you can see I'm logged in. So it didn't do it this time because I've already connected on this machine before. But it would give you that thumbprint to verify, hey, this is important because this is basically the hash of the C2 server. So if you don't get that thumbprint, that means you're not connected to the right thing, or somebody changed something, okay? And that's where you got to be careful. So now we're connected to it. Here we go. We got our nickname. We're in. So now this event log, we're going to close it because that's just the events I did before. So now we're in. So now let's see what we can do with it. So from here, all we have is, so accessing the managing C2 framework. So here they're just talking about basic operational security. They're saying change certain things, right? So it can be incredibly easy to fingerprint C2 servers. It can be specifically if they're out of the box like this. Why? Because they do the same thing over and over and over. But if you change certain things, you can fix it. So like for instance, Cobalt Strike C2 servers, they figured out a while ago that the Cobalt Strike adds an extra space at the end of the HTTP response. So anything with an extra space at the end was automatically denied, and so Cobalt Strike was automatically useless, right? Now they fixed that, obviously, but that's what they're looking for. They're looking for little things that are signatures or indicators that they can use against you. So keep that in mind, that you want to change as much information as you can. Now we're not going to cover all that in here, but we are going to cover how to access our server. So you can see here what they're saying is to keep this even better. How to securely access your C2 server by SSH port forwarding. So if you wanted to access your C2 server through SSH port forwarding, meaning you want to use SSH, but you want the traffic to be on, for instance, port 8080, right? So, and they'll show you why this is important. So, for those unfamiliar, SSH port forwarding allows us to either host resources on a remote machine by forwarding a local port to the remote server, or allow us to access local resources on the remote machine we're connected to, blah, 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 blah. So, again, it's circumventing firewalls. So, if a firewall blocks a certain port, you can port forward, meaning, so I say, hey, I want SSH to go in on this port, and then I want it to access on this port, right? Now, we're not doing that, so don't worry about it. If you don't understand it, you can do some research on it. But basically, it's a way to take port forwarding a step further. We'll say that. So now, let's go ahead and we're not going to set up a listener, but you guys are familiar with what listeners are. They sit there and they listen and they wait for a reverse connection or a connection to come back to them, okay? So they're telling you here you can set up a reverse listener if you want and have it sit there and wait for someone to connect. It's the same as when you do it on MSF Venom. And you can see they're telling you here how to get a call back. We're not going to do that only because I'm not going to have my own machine taken or do the attack box because we're going to already take over a box. So, all right. So which listener should you choose if you have a device that cannot easily access the internet? And that's DNS, because DNS is hosted either on a public namespace server, or it can be hosted on your own machine DNS traffic is very common. It should be something that's always going on. So that's why. Now, which listener should you choose if you're accessing restricted network segments? Remember back, they had this question earlier. It was the SMB. So there you go. And they actually have it listed right here with a restricted network. But they talked about it earlier in the SMB as well. So now, which listener should you choose if you're dealing with a firewall that does protocol inspection? That's HTTPS. And the reason for that is because almost any firewall is going to allow HTTPS traffic, because otherwise no one could connect to the internet, and then it would just be a waste of a network. So now we're going to go ahead and start using Armitage. So here we're hosted Armitage. This is our C2 server, but we have no hosts. We have no bots. We have no one to take over. So let's do a quick scan. So hosts. So we go to hosts and map scan. We're just going to do a quick one, okay? Because I already know what this is, and I don't want to take it for it to take a while. So here's our IP. 10.10.146.249, right? So hit OK. It runs the scan. Boom. Now, one thing that's cool, look at that. We notice it's sitting here. Now, it won't be red on yours because I've already taken it over, so it already knows what to do with it. That's the only reason it's red, because I've already taken this box over. On yours, it should just be regular, but it tells you what version of Windows it is. Now, the nice thing is you can see here, that's what it'll look like on yours, most likely. Okay. And then from here, they're telling you, they give you a picture of a different one. So don't follow this picture because this is an Android exploit. I'm not sure why they do that. But what you're going to do is you're going to go to the actual payloads here. Okay. And we're going to go to Windows because this is a Windows box. And then we're going to look for, scroll down. Okay, so, oh, I'm under payloads. I'm sorry. I went under exploit. Windows. And then we're going to go down. Where is it? Maybe I missed it. SMB, there we go. I didn't see it though. There it is. Okay. And then from here, if you guys know, Eternal Blue is one of the most recognized attacks in the world. So you can see it's right there. So nice thing is, all you have to do is drag this over and say, boom, let's take it over. Launch it. And look at that. So we have one. Let's make sure it worked. Okay. So now what we can do is we right click here. And you notice we have shell 2, interpreter session. Now the reason I have all these is because I've already taken over this box and I didn't want to restart the box and do all that. So now I should have another shell 5. Yep. So we have 2 shells and 2 interpreter shells. Now all you have to do to get these, and I'll show you. So now we're just going to use shell 5 because that's the one we just got. So we'll go ahead and disconnect these ones. Disconnect. I just don't want them to get too many and start breaking. So we're going to use shell 5 here. You guys will have shell 1. So now from here you can start putting these exploits to use, right? So we have the exploit, we have it, now we have a shell. So now after you receive the shell, right click the host, interact, right? So that's where we're at. We're going to go here and you can shell and interact, and that'll give us an actual shell. So if we go to shell 5 and interact, look at this. So now we have a shell on this. So if we say dir, where are we? Perfect. So now we have the shell. That's interesting. So now it says, what flag can be found after gaining admin access? Well, let's type who am I? Let's find out who we are first. Okay, so we're authority system. So we already have root access. So we're good. So now let's just go to where they always keep the flags. So CD users, it should be users. Okay, and then we can go ahead and check, but there should be an admin. Yep, CD administrator. And then they always put it on their desktop. That's pretty common. Now we'll say root.txt, okay. Not touch. Type root.txt. Boom, and there it is. So if you guys didn't see what happened, I already have the admin to the box. We already are in Teeth Authority System. So I just went to the admin desktop, found the root.txt, and there it is. That is the first flag. Now the second flag would be Ted's flag. So all we have to do for Ted's flag is go to Ted and go to his desktop. And we can see let's see, maybe he doesn't have it in his desktop. I'm trying to remember where we found it at. Interesting. Okay, it is there. I don't know what happened there. Okay, so it is there. So we'll just say user.txt. I didn't see it the first time. All right, so there we go. So user.txt, and that's on Ted's desktop. So now we have both of the flags, but we need to get the actual, we need to go ahead and get the NTLM hashes. Now, you could actually go through and find them on the machine since you have access, but I'm going to show you guys how you can do it using, because this is a Metasploit tool too. So let me show you. So right here, if you read this carefully, let's see. So, all right, so here you go. So it'll say here, we recommend that you run the multi-manage shell to interpreter module. So what they're saying is, we think you should run this into a interpreter shell. Okay, cool. So what we need to do is we need to go over here, and you can see, make this smaller. There we go. So we go here, and we want post, because we already have control of this machine. Okay, we want multi-manage. So keep in mind, we just have a regular shell here. This is not a Metasploit shell right now. Okay, and then we want shell to interpreter. So we're going to hit them with that. And then the session we want to do is 5, because if you remember, we're on shell 5. You guys should be on shell 1. And we'll go ahead and launch that. Okay, so the reason it's not working is because it's already using that, and that's because I already have interpreter session. So it will work for you. I have interpreter session already, so it's using the same port. It won't work, okay? So now that we have the interpreter session, let me show you what'll happen. So interpreter session, we'll say dump hashes. So let's go ahead and go back to post, okay? And we're gonna say post, Windows, we wanna gather information, and we're gonna go down to hash dump. So if I carry hash dump over here to this, and we're gonna do shell 3 because that's my interpreter session. Now your guys will probably be 2, and we'll launch it. Now watch what happens. Okay, so it actually worked for me. If it doesn't work for you, okay, so it didn't work, perfect, which is fine. That's what I wanted. So if it doesn't work for you, what you have to do is you have to go here and say access, and you want to pass the session. Now the reason for this is because the generic session that they have here doesn't work, okay? And that's fine. It doesn't work. So when you pass the session, you'll get a different session, and from here you can actually use it. So watch what I mean. So now we'll do hash dump, and we'll say session should be 4 instead of 3, and watch what happens. Now I don't know why you have to pass it. Oh, okay, so now I'm getting errors. Okay, so we're getting all kinds of errors. That's fine. Oh, session can't be blank. Okay, well, I thought it wasn't, but whatever. So we'll just do it this way. So we'll say access dump hashes. Let's see if it'll do the registry method. Okay, so there we go. There we go. Okay, so we're still getting the same errors. So there's some sort of issue. Session can't be blank, where it's not actually taking it. And that's fine. What we can do is we can go ahead and kill this session. Kill this session. Just for the sake of I want to make sure that you guys actually get to see it. So I want to kill the sessions. Okay, so now we'll go back and we'll upgrade this to the we'll go ahead and upgrade this to the multi-handler. So we want shell to interpreter. So I want to go ahead and upgrade this, and we'll say 5. The session should be 5. Now you can actually double click this, and it'll show you the session there. So if you're just not sure about it. Okay, so it's not going to work because it's already in process and all this crap. Basically, I had this running too long, and I killed a lot of the processes. And this was afraid of why I didn't want to open a bunch of sessions, but it's fine. It doesn't really matter. If you guys go ahead and you upload the shell to Meterpreter from your regular shell, you'll get a Meterpreter session. From there, if you get a Meterpreter session and it will not work for you, you need to pass the session. Now, when I said that, you can see when you go to when you go there, pass session. On Meterpreter, it'll be under interact or whatever the first thing is, pass the session, and you want to pass it to a different type. Now, the reason for this is because the default session errors out because it can't find the boot record. Now, that's fine. It doesn't matter. You don't need to know what all is going on as long as you understand that you need to pass to a better shell, okay? So that will give you the NTLM hash. If not, they're both here. You can see them, but that will give it to you if you guys are wondering why. Now, Armitage is a fine C2 server. It's not my favorite. It's finicky, and it doesn't, in my opinion, it's not as seamless as some of the other ones. We'll say that. So that's why I say that I left it too long. Eternal Blue also is extremely finicky, so if you guys don't know that, that's also probably part of the reason. But just keep in mind, the reason it's not working for me is because that port's already in use. So let's go ahead and go to 7. All right, so we can go ahead and terminate this machine, I believe. Okay, so now we can go to 7. We can terminate that one. There's always room for improvement. So what does that mean? Exactly what they're saying. They're saying you need to get a redirector. If you remember, we've covered this up top. Here they're explaining how to set it up, and they're showing you. Now, the reason I'm not going to set this up is for a couple of reasons. One, they want you to set it up on your machine, on the attack box. The attack box has very little RAM. It takes a while already. Number 2, it doesn't help to set up a redirector if the redirector is sitting on the same machine as your C2 server. If one gets blocked, they're both going to get blocked, right? So I get what they're doing. They're showing you how to do it. You could follow these steps and understand it, but keep in mind that they are basically telling you to set up a redirector, which, as we know, it will get through and then go to the redirector versus, but here they're trying to have you set up on the same machine. So they're telling you how it's set up. And the redirector you can set up to change certain things about the payload too that will make it less noticeable and things like that. Now, for instance, perfect example, here they're showing you, okay, they're running the MSF Venom, but here they're changing the HTTP user agent to not Meterpreter. I mean, obviously it's a joke. So you can see here, if you click here and they go through the Wireshark logs and they find that when they actually look at it, the user agent is not Meterpreter. Now, the reason they want you to change that stuff and understand how to is because if you have that set, the HTTP user agent, as whatever the default is, it's going to get blocked because it's going to get caught very fast. But if you get very, very smart with it and you start looking at what other applications use, you can change your packet to look like whitelisted applications, right? So that's what you want to do. That's what you're looking to do here. So here they're showing you again how to set up the rewrite engine, setting up the exploit multi-handler, which you guys should know how to do that. And then you can see here, victim 1, victim 2, they go to the redirector, not the C2 server. And again, we're not going to do that in this lab for the sake of time. But you can see what setting name allows you to modify the user agent, and that's HTTP user agent. We just saw that right here, HTTP user agent. That is the setting that allows you to change it. And then what setting allows you to modify the host header, and that's HTTP host header. So hopefully you guys like this how to choose your C2 framework. That's all depends on what your goals are, what your budget is, that type of stuff. What do you need? Do you need something straight out of the box that you can start with tomorrow? Do you need something that you will need highly antivirus evasion with a bunch of customizable options, all that stuff? So keep that in mind. Do your research if you're going to use this for red teaming, or pen testing, but not illegal matters. We don't condone that here. So thank you guys. Hopefully this helped you guys. And if it did, hopefully you guys have a great day. Thanks, guys.